Welcome to another episode of The Next Generation. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm super excited because today I have the amazing Cassidy Johnston on, and she is the owner of Not Your Average Rancher, a business that her and her husband created. And Cassidy is just a truly amazing speaker and advocate for agriculture. Cassidy and her husband are both first generation ranchers up in the mountains of Colorado, where they have their three little boys, raising those wild ones up there in agriculture, and truly just being amazing people and amazing lights for those first generation ranchers and ranch managers out there, and just a little bit of everything else. So I won't talk too long. Cassidy, I'm just going to let you take it away and just share a little bit about your story and your background in agriculture, and just kind of tell the people who you are.
Sure. Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. So, I am Cassidy Johnston. I grew up in a suburb of Denver and got into ranching my junior year of college. I went to CU Boulder and I have a hippie degree. So, hippie degree, hippie school. My husband and I have the very long and short of it is we've worked for several large ranches in 3 different states. We now manage a large high altitude operation outside of Canyon City, Colorado. I have my own business. We're hard to keep straight. So our ranch management business is JRC Ranch Management and Consulting, and then I have my own consulting and speaking business, and that one's Not Your Average Rancher. Although I think I might do some rebranding there. But I'm also a bull and semen rep for Leachman Cattle of Colorado, and I do some marketing for them. I'm a freelance speaker and consultant and work with ag tech startups, mostly is where most of my consulting lives. And I speak to all kinds of groups about all kinds of topics around the beef industry and the next generation in communication. Communication's kind of my wheelhouse. And like you said, we have 3 little boys. My oldest is 9, and I have a 7-year-old and a 4.5-year-old. So stuff is wild. They're not here. So you hopefully you won't hear them. And that's just it. We are both, like you said, we're both first generation producers. And so that comes with a little bit of interestingness, but we are excited that, we've been able to work on some of the biggest ranches in the industry, and it's really taught us a lot. And we're just here. This time of year, it's April. And like you said, we live at 9,000 feet. And so this time of year, it's like, we're just existing. We're just trying to get to where there's like the spring, it's going to show up. We're all very tired of the winter. So my brain is not firing on all cylinders, but it is sunny. It's sunny here today. So
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh. I love that you and your husband are not only first generation ranchers, and you came from the suburbs of Denver, where, typically when you think of the suburbs of Denver, you don't necessarily think of someone becoming a first generation rancher, especially going to CU Boulder and all of those different sorts of things. You did not really have a cultivating environment for becoming a rancher. So I would love to just kind of hear a little bit about your story of that journey of going from your environmental science degree that you were doing and working with those ranchers, and then deciding, oh, hey, I really love this, and would like to be in it myself.
yeah. So my junior year, I was looking for a thesis topic for an honors thesis because I was an overachiever. So kind of am, not in a good way. And before I was an environmental studies major, I was a business major. I switched to business when I realized I hate accounting so much. And so I was working for the business school. I worked for the business school all through college, and we were doing an economic impact study of the National Western Stock Show in Denver. So I was at Stock Show for 3 weeks, like with a clipboard. If you guys were bothered by a gal with a clipboard in 2009, no, what was it, 2009? It was 2010. Sorry, that was probably me. Sorry, not sorry. But when I was there, I just, stock shows, if you've never been, it's a big deal. It's really cool. There's all kinds of stuff. And it made me think of when I was a little kid, and my godmother lived in Aspen and had a good friend who ran a ranch, and we would go ride horses. I gave 0 F's about the cows. I just wanted to go ride horses because I was 5, 5-year-old girls, like, woohoo. And I was like, I wonder if there's a thesis topic that would let me hang around with horses. And in my brain, horses go with ranching and ranching goes with cows. And so I was like, I wonder if there's a way to write a paper about cattle. And the first the first topic I had was about sustainability, but that was, like I said, that's 2010. That was a long time ago. Sustainability wasn't really a thing. We weren't really talking about that a ton then. And so I kind of settled on the relationship between environmentalists and ranchers and how we're both kind of working for the same thing. And my thesis advisor at CU was like, okay, cool. This is a great topic. We don't have an ag school. What do you know about cows? I was like, nothing at all. So she was like, well, you're probably gonna need to get somebody to help you with that. So I cold emailed the entire beef production department of Colorado State, like the whole thing. And one professor emailed me back. Shout out to Dr. Ahola. Thank you. And I went to Fort Collins and we talked about the project. And he said, I'd love to help. And he said, have you ever like been around cattle? And I'm like, no, not really, like not to speak of. And he said, well, we should probably fix that. So he invited me up to RDEC, the college farm. And my husband, he wasn't my husband yet. He happened to be up there. He had to teach me how to AI a cow. That was really special. So that started that whole thing. And then he said, you should probably like spend some time on a ranch. And so my mom at the time was a landman for an oil company. And she called up some of her clients and said, hey, can my daughter, who has never lived more than like a mile away from Starbucks, like come live with you for the summer or for a few weeks and do some research? And they said, sure. So that ranch was in North Park, which for the listeners, that's like in between Steamboat and nowhere. So super, super northern Colorado, super cold, but beautiful in the summer. So I was supposed to stay 3 weeks there, and I ended up staying the whole summer. And Bert, my husband now, happened to be working on a ranch just up the road, which is kind of a miracle because there was nobody there. That's the least populated county in Colorado. And Dr. Ahola, being the meddlesome, lovely fellow that he is, sent me an email. And he was like, hey, so Bert's down the road. I didn't know if you knew this, but Bert's like down there. And I just thought you guys might want to hang out. So I let him know where you are. And I'm like, thanks, Dr. Hola. But it turned out really well. And he did come to our wedding. And after that, I graduated that winter and went back. They hired me on for calving season. And after that, and Bert came to work, and that was kind of it. So after that, we worked for Sitz Angus in Harrison, Montana. We were at the Silver Spur, the Kiowa Creek division for a long time. We were in New Mexico for a while, and now we're here. So that's kind of whenever I talk to audiences about professional development for the next generation, especially if we're talking about first generation producers, they're like, it's so hard to teach skills. I'm like, dudes, respectfully, if I can learn how to put up fence and ride a horse and deal with cattle and drive a tractor and put up hay, like in a summer, we can do this. Like we can figure this out. I promise. So that experience has been really helpful for me in thinking about how we help the next generation of producers. But that's how it happened. There are many days when I'm like, how is this my life? Like I was going to go to law school. Like I'd already started studying for the LSATs. And then I didn't, which is good. I don't think I would have been happy. I would not have been happy to be a lawyer. I did a bunch of law internships. Like that was my plan. Glad I did not go that route. I think I probably would be miserable. But I don't know. I might have a cleaner car.
Yeah, potentially. I know that, having a clean car sometimes is nice, but at the same time, I think it's one of those lives that we wouldn't trade for anything. And I just think that your story is so magical and so cool in a sense of you coming just almost taking a full 360, not even just a 180, like a full 360, and going to a life to now having a ranch management business with your husband and being in high altitude Colorado and kind of the high country and raising 3 little cowboys these days and everything like that, going from having a Starbucks a few blocks away to not even having cell service probably most of the time and things like that. And so I just think that that part of your story is so cool, and especially for those first generation ranchers. And I think it's a good reminder for the ranchers that have been in it for generations that don't always judge a book by its cover. Like, you don't know how quickly these people that are first generation ranchers are going to be able to learn and adapt and be a part of this life if they're never given the opportunity. Like, if they have that fire in them, let's continue to cultivate that. And so I would love to just kind of hear a little bit more of your advice and your thought process behind those first generation ranchers and bringing up more people in the ranching community and things like that, with you and your husband both being first generation ranchers yourself.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. I'll try to keep it as kosher as I can. And it's funny because we didn't talk about first generation producers. This is like a new buzzword thing that we're doing. And on the one hand, I totally get it because it's different to grow up on a generational operation. Um, on the other hand, it gets a little bit annoying because people pigeonhole you. And I'm pretty active. LinkedIn is where I'm the most active, which is hilarious. But I get lots of people thinking I'm like 20, and I'm like, my dude, it's been almost 15 years. Like, I had one guy a couple weeks ago. I forget what we were talking about, but he said, you really, I see you work for Lee Leachman. Like, you should ask him about calving heifers in Montana and how hard it is and blah, blah, blah. And I said, I personally have calved like a whole lot of heifers in Montana. Like, I don't need to ask Lee how hard it is. It's the absolute worst, if you must know. Like, I think one year we had 300 or 400 to calve, and it was winter in Montana in January. Like, I don't need to ask somebody, but thank you. And like you said, I think there's a little bit of a tension because how do we need to be really welcoming to the next generation. We're pretty exclusive group. We're pretty proud that there's not very many of us, and we like to say, oh, we're just one big family. Like, yeah, but you're a family you have to kind of fight your way to get into a little bit. But on the other hand, I understand when we can't, not everybody is cut out to do this work. Not because they're better or worse than we are, but just because it's very different work than most people are used to if you didn't grow up in it. So I understand wanting to be discerning and really pick and choose the kids who are going to, air quotes, make it. But I think sometimes where we are really quick to judge a book by its cover, we don't always. There's really no funnel. There's not a funnel to get into agriculture. It's not like you do this and then you do this and then you do this, which is something I'm trying to help. But we have to recognize there are so many resources that are available to young people starting in agriculture that you literally don't know about unless you grew up in agriculture. Like, I didn't know what FFA was until I was like 25. We didn't have FFA at my high school. We had FBLA, which is Future Business Leaders of America. Like, we were not raising farmers in suburban Denver. Like, no. And so I just encourage people, like, I get requests all the time. Like, I had a call with a young lady yesterday who wants to get into ag. And I said, it goes both ways. Like, if you want to get into any part of agriculture, whether it's finance or sales or production agriculture, there's a million different ways you can get involved. Understanding that you're always going to be learning. All of us, we're all always learning, and being a little humble, and like we all, I've had people, be like, well, I just come here and they know everything. And I'm like, do you not remember yourself when you were 20? Because I remember myself when I was 20. Like, we're all pretty sure we all know everything. Okay. Like, can we just walk it back a little bit and just remember what we were all like when we were super young, but also building the relationships that we need and taking chances on people. People took chances on me. They took chances on my husband. We've been hired to work together on places, which is not super common, both on the cowboy crew, and I've also done the data side because I really love data. But I think as an industry, we need to get a little better at discerning the ethic and the attitude, because we can teach the skills. we like to pretend that these skills are super hard to learn. And it does take some experience to really learn cattle and learn grass and learn horses and all that. But it doesn't take much to teach somebody how to fix fence and how to check water and how to be useful. There's the threshold for being useful is pretty low if you have somebody who's good to be around and is willing to learn. So our people management in this business is not great. And so I think it really kind of kneecaps us when we don't give people a chance simply because they don't come from a background that we understand. And that's not to say you won't get duds. You always will. Some people will surprise you. Like, we've had fantastic interns. We've had interns that I pray I will never have to deal with ever again. We've had interns that have been politely asked to leave, or we've just called their mom and said, come get your kid because this isn't working. But most of the time, when you give young people a chance and let them have some ownership, and it's funny when I say that on the internet, people are like, well, but what if I'm like, not give them the brand new combine, not put them in the brand new whatever, or not say you choose the bulls this year, Bob. Like, no. I mean, like, let them fix fence alone. Let them muddle through, give them their own cows to feed. Like, let them have ownership over the raking of the hay, whatever it is, let them have ownership over something, because responsibility goes a long way. But one thing that is uncomfy to talk about, that I talk about with my audiences a lot, is that we are a very aging industry. We are quite literally dying, if we look at the statistics, and we hold on to our traditions and our lifestyles so hard. It's kind of like when a little kid holds on to a kitten and you're like, loosen that up there just a bit, or else we're holding on to our love of this business so hard that sometimes I worry we're going to strangle it a little bit. We have to let new people in. And people always, one of the things I hear from my farming and ranching audiences a lot is, well, what about traditions? What, they can't be taught? Like, you can't teach a 20-year-old your traditions? You can only teach like a 4-year-old? That's not true. We do things very traditionally, and I didn't get into this business until I was 21. So it's all about, you get to choose what's most important to you and pass it on to the next generation, whether that's your kids or your interns or your management, whoever it is. And, no one is coming to save us. We have to save ourselves. And part of saving ourselves is, how are we going to literally replace ourselves? And how are we going to get the workforce and the skill set that we need? And a lot of that's going to be us cultivating it. We can't rely on land-grant universities to do that. We can't rely on, people to show up and be like, hey, I'd love to do this for you. We kind of have to be a little friendlier, and really be a little more proactive, I think. And that's not the most popular point of view, but I really love this industry, and I have a hard time when people, they say they love it too, but what they do shows me that they're actually more concerned with what they have going, and I get it, but you gotta look at both ends of the deal.
Yeah, for sure. I think that is so important to remember. And you touched on so many extremely important topics that I think everyone listening, whether you're a seasoned rancher or someone that is a first generation rancher yourself, that are all extremely important to remember and listen to, and all of those things. Could you touch on just the idea of the communication with that aspect? I know that that's kind of your niche and forte. And I think a lot of us probably understand that our parents, or those old traditional, not old, our parents are not old. We can't say they're old. I know that that's a touchy subject, but those more traditional people, and just the generation that came before us, are very set in their ways sometimes. And maybe communication isn't their best skill or stuff like that. So when these people are coming in, it's a really hard hard concept for newbies in a sense to be able to understand the way that those old ranchers are communicating, that, and then those old ranchers not being able to communicate the best, and putting it in a way for new individuals to understand. And then also, whether you're a new rancher or whether you're a consumer, I think that communication plays extremely heavily on both sides. So I'd love to hear just kind of your opinion and input on that as well.
I have a whole keynote about generational stereotypes and communication and transition and succession, because this is a big problem. We are not an industry that is good at communicating. And I say that having been on the management side and have worked for really, really good managers and really, really bad managers.
Yeah.
My good friend Taryn Dreeling is doing a lot of work in this area, because if you guys haven't heard of her, go listen to her podcast about how we need to be tough in this business. And she kind of breaks that down really fast, because, communication is viewed by a lot of people, older generations especially. And again, we're not throwing the boomers under the bus. We really aren't. But there's a divide here. And communication is incredibly important. And it's viewed by many as kind of a warm, fuzzy skill, like a soft skill, like it's not something we really need, but we really, really do. Because whether we're communicating, communication is a huge thing, but good, leadership is actually just code for communication, and vice versa. Good leaders communicate well, and they communicate in a way that other people understand. And, we've all heard the old phrase about like what happens in the pen stays in the pens, or, don't work cows with your wife. And I actually hate it a lot. I think that's a really dumb thing to say, because that basically says we can treat each other poorly when we're working on the ranch, and that's fine. It's not fine, especially because most of us work with our families. And I enjoy working cattle with my husband. It's one of my favorite things to do. He hates being at the chute, but it is what it is. And there, I think there's a couple things that we just take as, well, this is how it is, and we're all tough. And, well, sure, but we also have a huge mental health crisis. So how tough are we really? And how's that serving us? And when it comes to communication, older generations communicating back to younger generations and vice versa is incredibly important when we talk about succession and transition. And, only 23% of farms and ranches have a succession plan, which is alarming, especially given we're going to have hundreds of millions of acres change hands in the next 10 to 20 years based upon people leaving the industry because they are old. Like, we hate to talk about it because it's uncomfy, but like, can't live forever. So I think it's really, for instance, my husband and I we just did a King Ranch management lectureship last week, and it was about it was a cow-calf business. So it was mostly like accounting, like really deep into the weeds of running 2 sets of books and which one we're using for this. But one of the first things we did was go over mission and vision, which are 2 things that a lot of ranchers don't want to talk about. What's the plan here? And then how do we communicate that plan back to the people we are working with? Because we all have to be rowing. We're all in the same boat. So we better all be rowing in the same direction. And we don't want to think about that because it's hard. It's hard to set a mission and a vision, and it's hard to work. It's hard to think about that. But also, what are you doing if you're not? Where are you headed? If you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? And part of it is that we really love, in the ranching business especially, we're in it for the lifestyle. Well, no, it's a business. And when we think about continuing education, I think some people think at some point you stop learning. But one of the guys in attendance, he was not teaching the class. He was in attendance with his son and his grandson. And his name is John Welch. And for the listeners who don't know John Welch, he ran the Spade ranches for a really long time. Like, John Welch knows what's up. The Welch family runs cattle in I think 3 or 4 different states. Like, if they're there thinking that they're going to learn something, like, okay, well, I think we can all think about that. But the way he put it was, he said something like, ranching is an art, that needs to be treated like a business, that needs to be run through the lens of a business. Because it's true, there is an art to knowing which cattle to ship and which pastures to rotate and how, which heifers to keep and all that kind of stuff. But you have to do it like a business. And when you have a business, you have goals, you have plans, you have money, you have books. And so the communication is how you get everybody going the same way and how you really help people understand. And communication is especially important when we're thinking about the next generation, because when I was writing this keynote about transition and succession, I did a ton of research because obviously I don't have any personal experience with that. I do have personal experience with watching the dumpster fire that can be very bad family relationships. But a lot, tons and tons. I got hundreds of responses on LinkedIn. And the number one thing that young people said was, besides like, let us make our own mistakes, is tell us what you're doing. Yeah. Bring us into the decision-making process. Help us understand the books. Help us understand the decisions that you make. Take us with you and introduce us to the bankers and the feed store people. Like, we need to know all this. Because if you're handing this business down to me, I need to know this. This is not something you just learn by osmosis. You don't learn how to run 2 sets of books. You've got your tax books and your managerial books. And are you doing accrual or a cash basis? Like, a lot of ranchers don't even know that, but like, you should. By the way, I'm going to put a plug in here. You should know those things. But I think it's uncomfortable to think about succession planning because it means that somebody somewhere is going to die, right? Mm-hmm. Which is uncomfy, but like, it's how life works. Yeah. And what's hardest for me as someone who does not own a ranch is thinking about, we have all of these family ranches and we know that family ranches are going out of business. Some of them are going out of business because nobody made a plan. Yeah. Or nobody looked at their agreements. Like I saw, I follow a transition succession expert on LinkedIn, and he was talking today about how this family, they just downloaded a pretty standard LLC clause, a contract. And they run a feed yard and they didn't notice there's a sneaky clause. It was between 2 brothers in the contract that said, if brother A dies before brother B gets it all. If brother B dies before brother A, same thing. So if they had left that clause in there, and if they hadn't found it, their kids would have ended up with nothing. Yeah. Which was not their intention. So like, imagine if that had actually happened and they hadn't known about it until, person A or person B died prematurely. So they're already dealing with something like that. Plus then they realize, and then what happens if they realize that brother B or A or whoever it was actually turned out to be not as nice as they thought? Because do you know how many stories I heard from people who are like, hey, guess what? My family doesn't talk anymore. Yeah. Like, do we really want that? And from my perspective, which sometimes people have a problem with it because I didn't grow up in this business. It's, man, if I was given a ranch, because, the likelihood of us owning a ranch is slim to none. If I was given a ranch, I would do everything I could to make sure that I didn't lose it. Yeah. And I understand there's so much emotion tied up in it because this is the place your great grandpa homesteaded and stuff. But like, shouldn't that make it even more of a big deal that you run it like a business, so that, it's not worth running it like a lifestyle because you'll lose the lifestyle when you lose the business. So don't you want to kind of, and I understand people say, well, you don't understand because you don't have anything tied up in it. And I'm like, it's a business. You have to remove the emotion from it. And if you can't, you have to hire somebody who can help you do that. I understand it's hard. Everybody, universally, almost everybody said, hire a mediator or bring in a third party who knows all of y'all, has no stake in the deal, and can help, because it's going to get messy because families are messy. But a lot of times they're messy because the communication is so poor, or they never learned how to communicate effectively. And the other thing too is when we talk about people management, it's not just with our own families, it's with the people we have working for us. And you know, I don't think you should have to like put up with like verbal abuse just to go work on a ranch and be a cowboy. Like some of the stuff that I have had screamed at me is like, ask me how that impacted my employee performance. Like, was I really all in? No, I was looking for a new job. and and so this communication bit is, it feels like a warm, fuzzy, like soft, oh millennial, oh Gen Z, like, ugh, you guys are so soft. And it's like, is it really soft to have a goal and communicate that with the people that are working for you? The King Ranch does it. Like, and I know they're not like, not everybody thinks they're maybe as cool as I do. But when you when like, and I'm slightly biased because we've had friends that have worked there and have just had really good things, but like, we've worked for some of the biggest ranches and none of them are like, we have no program, we're just gonna see how it goes. No. And the best managers will help. For instance, you got to tell your guys, hey, I need inventories. I need you guys to tell me how many hay bales you have, how much fuel you're using, how many calves you've got. Why? They don't know. Explain to them what you're doing and why you need to know, and give them some ownership over that. And that may sound silly, but when we help people understand why we make the decisions that we do, even if they don't like the decision, it sure helps. So communication is like, it sounds unnecessary, but it's really not. We really need it. And it will help. I think it'll help solve a lot of the problems that we have in this business. And like you said, lots of the older, we shouldn't say older, not everybody's a good communicator. Doesn't matter how, my husband doesn't like to talk, but he's a great manager. People will say, well, I don't want to blah, blah, blah. I don't care. You can learn. If I can learn how to run 2 sets of books, I promise you can learn how to do communication, because I suck at numbers and math. Guys, like, there's a reason I left my business major. But I think sometimes we like to say, oh, I'm just not good at that. Can't learn? I think you can. Like, I really think you can. I think people just don't actually see why we need to. And I was giggling with Taryn because we're all in a group chat together, she and a few of our friends, and she was getting some DMs from some people about, because she, Faith, Family, and Beef is her old platform. And I mean, it still is. She still does a lot of advocating for agriculture, but I don't like this new look that you have. I want to unfollow. Like, we don't need to be talking about this. Everything's fine. And she's like, does somebody need to have a little, I mean, you could tell she's like, you're the person I'm talking about, Steve. Yeah. Like, everyone's, I'm not raising no snowflakes. And she's like, I would like to have access to your children. Let's talk about this. Let's see how they feel about you. Because, and it's hard, when we talk about communication and transition and succession, all those things, and leadership, we're asking people to look at themselves and be really honest about what they see. Yeah. And that sucks. It's not fun. Like, it really isn't. And having a group of people that can ask you the hard questions and can help you grow is really necessary, but it also means you have to be vulnerable with people. And we know that's very, very difficult, especially for men, especially in rural areas, especially where everybody's supposed to be tough. Being vulnerable and asking for feedback and being really honest with yourself about the places you need to improve is uncomfortable. I hate it. But that's how we grow, and that's where leadership happens. We never grow in the comfy spaces. Growth happens when things get a little Western. But I think there is a divide here in this. There's also a gender component, and so I think we can make a really good business case for better communication too, for the people who are like, we don't need feelings. We don't, but we should probably like tell everybody what the plan is, or ask. Like, I had people tell me when we were doing our succession planning, nobody asked anybody what they wanted. Grandpa just was like, here's how it's going to be. And as it turns out, that's not how anybody wanted it to be. So they sold it. You know, is that really, that's not the outcome we want, right? That wasn't, or I had one of my favorite guys on LinkedIn. He really doesn't like me very much. He said, you know, he was one of those, we don't need communication. You know, I'm a succession planning expert. And what the problem is that we make our succession plan and the next generation doesn't want it. And I'm like, that's not a succession plan, my friend. That is a mandate. And since you are, given your demographic and where you live, I think I know how you probably feel about mandates. And if somebody makes a plan and doesn't communicate it to everybody else, and they're like, oh, actually, no, I didn't really want that. That's not a plan. Yeah. Like, I hate to explain that. That's not a plan. That's a hope. That's a idea. It's a dream. So if we don't have a way to, that's point B and we're at point A, if we don't have anywhere to get from one to the other, a lot of people in the middle are going to throw up their hands and say, I don't want to do this. So what are they going to do? They're going to sell it. And that's not what we want. So I know everyone, there are going to be people who are listening to this who do not agree. And that's fine. We're not all here to agree. But somebody show me the case for less communication, for poorer communication, for let's yell at everybody and hope for the best. Like, I just don't think it's going to work so well, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. And it's tough to have those conversations and sit down and talk about that. And I feel like I'm blessed in a certain way because my dad lost his dad when he was 13 and they didn't have a plan. They did not know what they were going to do. And it was just my grandma, and his siblings didn't want anything to do with it. And so my dad was 13 years old and had to make a decision of what he wanted with his future. And that's terrifying. Like, no one should ever have to be put in that situation. And so in a sense, like, my brother and I have been blessed in the fact that a few years ago, my dad and I had to sit down and have a really hard conversation. But at the same time, it came from a point of view of, we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. I could get taken off of this earth in an instant. And God forbid we do not want that. That would absolutely break my heart. But at the same time, he has so much valuable knowledge, insight, know-how, all of this stuff that he had to start instilling in my brother and I. Because if he died today, we have to be able to go back to that ranch and take it over and run a successful business. I have to know where the books are. I have to know what the spreadsheet color coordination means. I have to know all the passwords. I have to be on the LLC. That way it doesn't get stuck in probate and all of these other things. And then, God forbid, we lose the ranch that way. And I don't want to have to pay inheritance tax and all of these other things that you have to have a team on your side of a lawyer, a accountant, a banker, all of these people that you need to have strong connections with as the people that are in that succession line, because God forbid something happen. We never want to think about our parents dying. That is hard and that is uncomfortable, but we need to sit in that with our parents of like, it's going to happen someday. And so let's make a plan for when that does happen. That way, when it does happen, we're not out on our butts. And we're not in a situation where an already bad experience just got made 10 times worse because we don't know what we're doing and we don't know what the plan is.
Exactly. And so many people that I talked to said, we learned that we needed a succession plan the hard way. Yeah. Because guess what, guys? Farming and ranching is really dangerous and we don't want to talk about it. But like you said, we are never guaranteed tomorrow. We just aren't. And if we're thinking about the legacy that we want to leave, we have to actively plan for the legacy that we want, whether it's on our own places or in the beef industry as a whole. And I do have experience with a parent dying rather suddenly before any of us were ready. And obviously we don't have a ranch, but my dad didn't leave a will. And like you said, it makes a really terrible time much worse. And I think about scaling that up to a ranching or farming operation. like where there's LLCs or corporations involved, where there's probate, where there's taxes, where there's all manner of things, where people's names need to be on bank accounts, and just the structure of, things will automatically revert to the next of kin, which, as it turns out, is not always the best plan. And we don't like to think about our family members being a little icky about some stuff, right? We don't like to think about that. It feels terrible. But I think everybody in this business, has a story of somebody dying from an accident. Like, we've been in this industry for, like I said, 15 years, and we've known people who have died. We've had friends our age who have died in farming and ranching accidents, or who have kind of, like, I have a good friend whose husband, they had a farm, and her husband's dad died when he was 18, same deal. And this kid is not only trying to figure out what to do, but his parents were divorced. He was left with over $1 million in debt. Yeah. Didn't have any way to go. His mom, as it turns out, wasn't very supportive. And we all have those stories, and we all have the stories of, they didn't plan, they kind of split it equally among the kids, and only 2 of the kids wanted it and the other 2 didn't. But the other, the 2 wouldn't let the 2 buy them out. They wanted to go get market prices for stuff. And so then the only thing to do was divide it 4 ways, which wasn't enough to support even one family. So then they all had to sell. And it really sucks to think about that. And I understand I don't have my own operation, but it's not hard to think about how that feels. And like you said, you do need to have a team, but the way to make that team do well is by communicating with them. It's like when you have a therapist, you can't lie to your therapist and expect for them to help you, right? You have to be really open with your lawyer and your succession planner and your banker and your guys, all this team that you're going to build for yourselves, your mediator. You have to be open and honest, because you don't want to leave anybody holding the bag if something bad happens. Because number 1, like you said, it makes a bad situation worse. But number 2, then we're asking people to show up in a time that's probably very hard for them. Like, ask me how productive I was in the months following my dad's death. Not really. Like, in my capacity for putting up with other people's BS, very low, very low, because you're grieving and you're angry and you're upset. And I think we're underestimating how hard that is. But of course we don't want to think about it. And then we also have the type of owner who is really, really, really hesitant to relinquish control. So they're not going to put their kid on the LLC. They're not going to put their kids on their bank accounts, or make thing to do is making an LLC. So you can't. So it's all very set up about who can do what. And there's ways to do it so your kids can't go drain the farm account if they are butt heads. We act like there's only one way to do it, but there's so many ways to go about it. And what I want most is to keep ranches ranching and farms farming. Yeah. I don't want people to sell if they don't want to. We work for absentee owners, which is a whole other kettle of fish. And land prices are what they are. And we know that when people sell, a lot of the time they will sell to the highest bidder. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the time the highest bidder is a developer. And we can't blame them. My LinkedIn blew up when the pitchfork in Wyoming went up for sale for $83 million. And people are like, how could they do this? Number 1, that ranch has had 3 different owners in the last 100 years. It's not a legacy property. Number 2, these people just want to retire. $83 million is a hell of a retirement. Okay. And they didn't want to do it anymore. We can't make people do it. We can't, there's ways to go about it. If you don't want to do it, but you want your kids to have the chance, you can put it in a trust or an estate or whatever that is. But we have to plan for it, and if we're really passionate about keeping our farms farming and our ranches ranching and minimizing the development of our agricultural lands, we have to understand that the reason things are getting developed is not that someone is coming and taking it. I understand that there are a lot of people who face enormous pressure from developers. Like, that's a thing. Absolutely. But, and there are times where people will flat knock on your door and be like, hey, you want to sell? Because we get calls here at the ranch all the time. Like, hey, is old Iverson thinking about selling? No, please stop calling. We'll let you know when he does. Thanks. And I understand that kind of pressure. But there's not like this nebulous cloud of doom who is coming in the night and taking ranches away from people. Like, they wake up one day and they've been teleported to a townhouse in New York. Like, that's not happening. Things a lot, there are things that happen in order for something to be sold. And I don't think we can shame people for selling. I really don't, because we also have asked a lot of kids to inherit stuff they don't want to inherit.
Mm-hmm.
But when we make it this nebulous, like, the man, we absolve ourselves of all responsibility. And that's not how we're going to fix this problem. We all have something we can do. And it's a very hard conversation. Like, none of this is easy. When I speak about this to audiences, I'm like, listen, this is going to suck for a minute. Some of the things that we're going to talk about are going to be deeply uncomfortable. And I understand. I'm not asking you to be comfortable. I'm not asking you to like me. I'm asking you to, like, sit with this. Mm-hmm. Because this is hard. This is really, really hard. But what's harder, thinking about doing the work now, or thinking about a disaster happening and having none of this done and ending up losing the farm or ranch? To me, that's much worse. Or end up with a family that hates each other, that can't even be in the same room because of the way that something went, And it's a big problem. And I think people get really overwhelmed. But I tell my audiences and my kids, you have to just look for the next right thing. Realize what is yours to do and do the next right thing. So if you have no plan, call you somebody and start thinking about a plan. If you don't love your plan, get everybody together, including your third party who's going to keep y'all from fighting each other, and do that. Like, these things take years, and you're allowed to not enjoy the process. Mm-hmm. You're allowed to not be super thrilled with how things are going, but just do the next right thing. Because I think sometimes people get overwhelmed and they're like, this is a lot. We've got all these people. Just take the next step. Just the next one. Just what the one is in front of you. And go that way and ask for help. Like, we need to ask. We're so bad at asking for help. We need to ask for help. In every way, because there are people who can help and they want to help. And there's all kinds of organizations and entities that do this work. They're not all good. You have to do your homework. When I was asking my audience about when I was doing all my research, I was like, well, how do you find these experts, these attorneys and these bankers? And they're like, ask your friends. Yeah. Go with someone that someone else has personally had a good experience with. Like, maybe don't go on the internet. But it's a funny place to be in, to be a first generation producer, thinking about all this stuff. But I remind people that we wake up every day and choose this business. We don't have to be in it. We're not obligated to stay. We'd make a lot of money doing way more money doing something else. But we choose it, and we continue to choose it every single day. And that's what I hope for everybody in this business, because I know there are people in this business who don't love their jobs. They feel suckered into it, or they always felt the pressure to take it over when they really didn't want to. And we are lucky enough to do something that we really enjoy. And so I want the future of the beef industry, the agriculture industry, to be one that's still family focused, mm-hmm. and not run by corporations. Not that all corporate run entities are bad. They're sometimes even better than you would think. But, I think about the future of the beef industry and what I would want it to be for my sons if they choose to be in it. And I want one that's filled with families, and people doing this work in the way that we've always done this work. But we're not going to get that if we don't plan for the future that we want to see. So, there's really no excuse for not planning. Like, yeah, it's hard, but you know, and people are like, well, it is hard and blah blah blah. And well, you're not a farmer or rancher if you're here to do stuff that's easy. Like you do hard stuff all the time. Every day you do hard stuff. This is just different kind of hard.
Mm-hmm.
But you can do it. You can do hard things. Like, tell me about how it was to raise cattle in the 80s. You made it through that. Like,
Yeah.
we can make it through a few dinners with an attorney. Like, you made it through the 80s, my friends. Like, you survived that.
Yeah.
Everybody survived COVID. We all, you know, if we're all still here today, we survived the downturns. We've survived the various droughts and the fires and the floods. Like we're here. We're still here. So if we can fight to save, you know, it's almost like you want to fight to save your farms and ranches the same way you fight to save a calf in a blizzard.
Yeah.
You know, you can do it. I've watched you people do it. I don't actually understand how people deal with some of this sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, you know how you get on the other side of a hard season, or like my first calving season in Rand, which is a terrible place to calve, we had precipitation for 40 days straight in calving season. Like we would have days and nights where we didn't sleep because we were bringing stuff in. And granted, I was 21 or something like that. So I had way more energy. We had one year in Montana where our calves were getting enterotoxemia in utero. Like, we were having dead stuff left and right. And I remember going in the vet room, absolutely losing my shit. Sorry, I cussed. Absolutely losing my mind, crying a whole lot. And then, like, going out to pull another one. Because that's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
We deal with the disasters. But sometimes I think we make them too, because those disasters are familiar. We know how to deal with fires, you know, acts of God, floods, fires, droughts, downturns in the market, you know, weird veterinary crises. But ask us to sit around a table with our family and write out the future of the farm, and people are like, nope, hard pass. Yeah. Like, we can do it. We can. It's just a different kind of uncomfy, you know. It's one that maybe, like, at least you get snacks. At least you're not cold, right? At least you're dry. Like, you're not sitting there in wet socks on your 18th cup of coffee. Like, hey, we can make this nice. We can do a dinner.
Yeah, exactly. I think that it's hard to take that first step a lot of the times towards that proper communication and asking that first hard question. What's your advice for just the people listening that are like, I don't know the plan. I'm pretty sure we are that people that don't have one, or maybe we talked about one 10 years ago and that plan is no longer accurate. My brother no longer wants to be part of the ranch, or my sister went and got a job in town or moved across the country or the world, or we need to change things up. What's that? If the people listening don't have a plan at all, what is that first step of communication and figuring out what to do next?
I think I would start with some woo vision and mission casting. I would tell people to sit down and really hash out what the future looks like. Like, if you could pick the future for your place, what would it be? And maybe do an exercise. Maybe everybody writes their own and you come together. Maybe you draw them out of a hat. I don't know. Maybe you make a game out of it involving like beer or cupcakes. I don't know. We don't need to promote alcoholism. But really think about if everything goes right, if I got to pick what the future looked like for this farm or ranch, this is what it would look like, and be really honest, because the answer might be my brother's running it and I have my job in town.
Yeah.
Like, that might be the answer, and you need to get real here. This is the real. And then, you know, a vision is great, but the mission is how you're going to get there, right? You have to have both, because a vision is just a dream unless you have a plan to get there. And the guy who's got the goals or the plans holds all the power. Yeah. So you have to remember, if there's a vision or a mission that you don't agree with, but you don't have one, the guy who does have one has the power. So
Yeah.
that's where I would start is really get a little bit fluffy and say, golly, if I could have anything, if I could, because I think in this business, we operate with a scarcity mindset so much. Like we almost like to be broke. We almost like to have the hardest life. And it's like John Welch, we talked about this and I'm going to quote him again, probably not entirely accurately, but people say I'm only profitable 1 year out of 20. This is the hardest business. And he's like, if I was only profitable 1 year out of 20 at the manager of the spade, they would have fired me.
Yep.
And I would have told them to do it because so think about really get into it. Like, what is it? Is it, do you own this place still? Is it more profitable? Have you grown it? Like, what is it? Or is it just the family is still here? We don't really care if it's making money because not everybody does. Like, get really honest with what that is. And then take it back a little bit and say, okay, in order to realize that, what are we going to have to do and who are we going to have to bring in to help us with it? Because you're not going to be able to do this all on your own. I think sometimes we think, oh, it's our place. We can figure this out. We used to be such a community focused bunch. And I think we still think we are, but we're not really. I mean, we are in a lot of ways, but you have to let people in. And there are so many people who would, if you came to them and said, hey, we are really thinking about the future of the farm or the ranch, and we don't know how to get to it, but this is our vision. This is what we want. There are so many people that are going to be like, okay, let's do this. Like, let's figure this out. And they may, just like you said, don't judge a book by its cover. They may not look or act like people that you've been used to dealing with. They might be younger or older or whatever it is. They might come from a different industry, but it doesn't matter when we're all working toward the same goal, but you have to know what that goal is.
Yeah.
And I think if everybody were to submit their ideas, I think that would also kind of flesh out the differences in what everybody's hoping for and really start the communication rolling. Like, oh, I didn't know you were hoping to grow. Or, oh, I didn't know that you wanted more cows here. I didn't know that. Or, oh, I didn't know you weren't interested. And I would also counsel people too to be really open-minded. Like, This is not a time to get mad. We're just spitballing here, as the business people would say. Let's spitball a bit. Let's figure out. Let's circle back after we spitball and move the needle and all those things. But yeah, I would start with the end. What do you want to see? And then work backward. And if it's hard to work backward, there are people who can help you do that, because I have a hard time with that. I'm a details person. So a big picture and then working back through all those big steps is very difficult for me. And I think a little bit of, a little personal development work is really helpful to understand who you are and how you function, whether that's an Enneagram kind of thing, whether that's just, visiting with your friends and asking them kind of what they know about you. The Enneagram is my personal favorite, or a working genius, or just one of those personality things. A lot of that also feels very woo, but man, it helps communicate with people a little better and communicate with them in a way that they receive. So that's where I would start and continue that, though. Continue it on to, like, where do we want to be succession planning wise, but like, where do we want this business to be in 2 years, in 5 years too? Like, do that work as well, because you that's part of making it in the long run. And write it down. Like, write it down and post it somewhere so everybody can see it. And there's coaches that'll help with that. You can go online and look at mission and vision statements. I was really surprised that we talked about that during the lectureship last week, because I'm like, well, golly, if we're talking about that in this professional of a setting, because I've done that with business coaches and stuff, but it applies, it works. Yeah. So start there and or if you've already done that, revisit, make sure everybody's still on the same page. And you might find out things are different, or you all agree, or whatever it is. But yeah, and I know, guys, it feels a little woo, but just maybe get a campfire around the middle and we can all, like, I don't know, set the atmosphere, but have fun with it.
Yeah.
And don't take yourselves too seriously, but also be super honest.
Yeah. I
Hold
don't
it
think it has
lightly.
to be something that we sit around and it has to be super serious, or everyone has to, like, don't go into this thinking that you're going to fight with your family. Like, go into this
Mm-hmm.
honest and open and understanding and seriously open to new ideas and
Mm-hmm.
open to people's opinions about things, and just sit back and bite your damn tongue for a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
because you would be amazed at what people will tell you if you are seriously able to lay down your pride and lay down your ego and have an open and honest conversation about where you want to be. And it's not going to be easy, but it will set you up for so much success in the future. And it's easier to have those hard
Mm-hmm.
conversations now than it is to have them when emotions are high, people are grieving, different things like that. It's a lot easier to go meet the banker with your dad sitting next to you than it is to go meet the banker
Mm-hmm.
because you were able to find out that you're not on the LLC, or because your dad passed away and now you have to go figure out the
Mm-hmm.
finances. Like, it's a lot easier to do it now than it is in the later. And we're not trying to scare you into this, but in a sense, it's some people need a reality
But
check.
still,
Yeah.
but you need to do it. And
Yeah.
like you said, if you're thinking you're going to fight with your family, that's a really good sign. You guys need to bring somebody else in.
Yes.
Or if you're listening to this and you're thinking like it'd be a lot easier to go to the banker without my dad, you need help. Like that is a sign that you, and guess what? That's fine. That
Yep.
is totally fine, because families are hard. They just are. Families are very difficult, not necessarily because anybody in them is a bad person. Families are made up of separate people, and when we're talking about a business in a family, that's a whole other set of pressure that most people can't understand. Like the fact that my husband and I work together, all my friends from high school are like, I couldn't. I'm like, I love it. It's fun. But also we have to leave business out there. But also I would also recommend to people, I was thinking as you were talking about this, once you've gotten past the initial, like the grown-ups phase of making this, rope in the kids when they're old enough. Like as
Yeah.
teenagers. Ask them what they want. Because everybody, the universal thing that my helpful research subjects told me was you can't start too soon. Start now. Start yesterday. Start last week. Do not put it off. It takes years. And
Mm-hmm.
get really honest, because you might find out that your quiet middle kid actually would love to take things over. He would love to be a part of it. He just doesn't know where he fits yet. Or you might find out that maybe your oldest son, who's always seemed to have the most aptitude, actually wants to be an engineer and he's always been afraid to tell you, you know. But like you said, be super honest, put your ego at the door. And if you can't, get a third party who doesn't mind to telling people to hush or act. Like I had one guy that was like, we had a good friend come who would bodily escort people from the room if they couldn't keep it together. And I'm like, knowing what I know about some of the families we've worked for,
That'd be
that's
beneficial.
not uncommon.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. But, and I, like you said, we're not trying to scare people, but this is a serious deal. It's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And you owe it to yourselves to do this work, because like you said, it's a lot easier to do this around a kitchen table than a casket, guys, and it's going to happen one way or another. And yes, that's a very difficult truth, but we, if we're going to take a really long view or kind of a religious view, because lots of people say, God asked us to steward this and so he'll take care of it. God asked you to steward it, right? So you need to do everything you can to do it well. And part of that is planning. We don't, I mean, personally, I don't think that's how God works. I think God gives us tools and helps
Absolutely.
direct our paths, and then asks us to accept the tools and the help. The raining down of the miracles happens, but like not always in the way that we think. It might be, the best banker in the entire world is your banker. Like, congratulations. Yep. Or you might have a neighbor or a pastor or a friend who's an excellent mediator. Yep. Or maybe you hire one. Maybe you just maybe you get given the gift of a family who's really involved. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But stewardship involves planning. all stewardship involves planning, and all businesses need planning too. So I would just, this conversation got real serious. Like, let's talk about death. But these, we love our farms and ranches. We love our family legacies, and legacies are not made overnight. None of this is. So let's do this work. Let's get it done. And do it in a way that honors everybody involved if you can. And park that ego. Please leave it. Please leave the ego. We don't need it. Yeah. And everybody should get a say in most parts of this until it gets down to the actual legal stuff. Because I've had people tell me too, like, y'all are gonna have to discern who's actually in this business.
Yep.
It's not always everybody.
Yep.
But
especially again, if you come from a family where you have 5 siblings or something like that. Mm-hmm. And
that's where the vision comes.
5 ways. It's one of those things like we've had the really hard conversation in my family. It's just my brother and I. And in the reality of it, we cannot split the ranch 50-50 if my dad were to pass away today, because my brother would never be able to buy me out. That's the reality of it. Like, unless we're going to do the business together side by side, he would never be able to buy me out. And that is an unfair position to be in. So that's a hard conversation to have, y'all. And I think it's a conversation that you need to revisit yearly. Sit your butt down yearly and have a family conversation that has anything changed.
Yes. And as you get married, as you add kids, and understand who, if you get married, who has access to what, and be really, really honest too about how much you think people want to be involved. Because I think a lot of parents are like, oh, we'd love for all the kids to come back. What if they don't want to?
Yep.
Don't make them. Or if they say, yes, we all want to come back, great. Leave yourself enough time to figure out how you can make it so they can either split it or all run it together.
Yep.
Make some investments and manage some money and move some, there's all kinds of resources out there, and people can help with this. Like you said, none of us are a banker and a lawyer and a finance person and a planner, and that's why you have those people to help you.
Yeah.
But this scarcity mindset of, this is always going to be hard. There's never enough resources. We're land rich and cash poor, blah, 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 blah. There is enough money to go around. There's enough opportunity to go around, but you have to go get it. Very rarely does somebody walk up to you and say, hey, I am selling the ranch next door for $1 an acre. You want in?
Yep.
No. I mean, yes, I do. I do want in, actually. Yes, I would. I would like all of it. I can pay you today. Got some Benjamins. But, you have to make your own luck and make your own opportunity, and then keep yourselves and your family in a place where you've planned and you've set visions, so you understand and see the opportunities when they do show up, because you will get them. That's how God works. You will, but how can you see it if you don't know what to look for? I don't know. If all you're looking for is the bad stuff, that's what you're going to find. But if you set a vision for the future that you are just absolutely in love with, you will be so surprised, or maybe you won't, at how much cool stuff happens to help you get there when you're willing to receive it and you're looking for it.
Yeah.
And you're all in the boat rowing together, even if you have to have a dude in the boat who threatens to throw one of you out if you are being butthead. Aside, we can all have a bouncer. We can all have a family bouncer. It's okay. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I just couldn't agree more with everything that you said. And like, this conversation is tough to hear. And I truly hope that the listeners listening to this sat through the rest of it. And you know what? Maybe you took a pen and paper out, pulled over while you were driving, took some notes on your phone or something like that, and were able to just spend some time processing this. And truly, like, after this episode, maybe you need to sit down with no music in your car and just think to yourself and think about these hard things, because this wasn't necessarily a fun, woo-woo, super positive conversation, but it's a conversation that needs to be had, and the reality of it. And it's one of those things that we can't just keep on letting ranches die and fall apart and families fall apart because of a lack of communication. And I think Cassidy is just such an amazing person to have on to talk about this because of your depth of knowledge, and also, in a sense, your outside knowledge coming into this, not being raised in the agricultural industry. You can come in with the mindset and the just blank honesty of, y'all need to check yourselves and really start running this like a business and have that business mindset with these ranches to keep them going and stuff like that, because we are so blessed to be in the industry that we are, and we have to steward it correctly. And so, Cassidy, I just can't even begin to thank you enough for coming on today and discussing all of this. And I would love to start to close out this podcast with a piece of advice that you have for the next generation coming up in agriculture. I'm sure we had a lot of those sprinkled throughout this episode, but if you had to give one piece of advice to the next generation, what would that be?
Never stop learning. Like, never think you know it all, because you don't. You just don't. None of us do. None of us do. If we can have some of the most legendary ranch managers and owners in a room learning, in a class with the rest of us, that I think says it all. But, never stop learning, never assume you know it all, and find ways. If you find yourself not enjoying what you're doing, that's a sign that you might want to make a change. It's not bad or good, but none of us are here to hate every moment of our lives. Yeah. And then the other thing I would say is, if you're young and you're listening to this, at some point you're going to get up to a place where you can reach down and grab the next person behind you and haul them up with you. Do that. If more people in this business would stop acting like there's not enough room for all of us, because there are. I'm not saying like kumbaya, like literally we need more people, friends. Like we need more folks.
Yeah.
So if you're going to figure out what you're good at and what your skill sets are. I am a great communicator. If we're talking about ranch things, I'm great with genetics, great with working cattle. Please don't ask me to mechanic. Please don't. It will not go well. You will need to hire an additional mechanic to fix what I have done. I can take off hoses. Like, guys, I don't have a mechanic mind. But figure out what you're good at and figure out how you can help, because there's always a way to help.
Yeah.
Whether that's on the farm or with the next generation or whatever it is, figure out what you're here to do and how you're made to serve, because we're all here to serve. We really are. And I think that'll help with the ego conversation we were having. If people would slide into things more with, how can I help? What can I do? No matter how impressive your job title ends up being, no matter how impressive your resume is, no matter how handy you are, like, I don't care if you're the world's best roper. I just don't. You will still have things to learn. I promise. I've witnessed it personally. So just keep learning and figure out how you can help, and figure out what you can do to, it's like, be the change. I hate that. It's so trite, but really. And also, I might request, can we stop with the weird giant rainbow sunglasses? Like, I would like to formally submit that request for the next generation. Like, I'm cool with a real fancy sunglass. I can get with the mullet. I can get with the hats that we have up here. But those gigantor sunglasses, I'm really curious about that. I just really am. I'm curious about it. I wish we wouldn't. I don't know why I have such an aversion to those sunglasses. But I do.
If you ever meet Cassidy in person, be prepared for her to come up and rip them off of your face, I'm sure.
I will, at the very least, make fun of you. I will look in them and just pretend it. I mean, my boys are really into them, so I can say that.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And we did just give one of my kids a very ridiculous haircut, so that's fine. But, if we could stop. Also, the permed mullets. That's a little strange. I understand that we're all very cool, but like, can we agree that we don't need to perm any hair? Like my dad had a perm, like a full on like perm, like he looked like Bob Ross. It just has never worked for anyone.
Yeah.
So actually, maybe I would swap out the glasses for the perms. I don't know what I would do, but I get it. It's cool. But we're trying so hard to bring the 90s back. And I just really wish we wouldn't. I wish we
Let
wouldn't.
them go.
I wish, let them go. It was a wonderful time.
Mm-hmm.
But the mullets and the bucket hats and the pleated jeans that my niece showed up to Christmas in, the Rockies jeans. Stop it. Stop. I don't want low rise, but we don't need rainbow sunglasses and we don't need pants up to our necks. I'm willing to accept fanny packs because I have one and they're really handy. I'm sorry, but
that's on it.
That's what I have. Next generation, you are allowed to look ridiculous. Please don't perm your hair. Always keep learning. And yeah, that's my those are my requests for the next generation. Please and thank you.
I couldn't have made up a better closing to this podcast if I had tried. That was chef's kiss, absolutely phenomenal. If you didn't get anything else out of this podcast, please just accept the fashion advice that Cassidy is trying
to stop perming your hair.
Yes.
Thank you.
Precisely. Like we can,
unless you're a parent, then let your kids perm their hair so that we can make fun of them. So you you can submit that as evidence later on in their lives when you're like, yeah, you had together when you were 20, did ya?
Yes. Unless we're using it as blackmail as a parent,
yeah,
get rid of it.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, but yeah, just say no to perms.
Yes. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Well, Cassidy, I have absolutely just truly loved our conversation today. And I know that I had a little bit of tough loving in this conversation that I needed to hear personally. It's funny how that always works out. And then I'm sure that it was a bunch of really great advice for everyone else that was listening to that. Just sit on this episode. And if you need to, re-listen to it and really, really let the words digest and be that kind of wake-up call that we all probably need sometimes, to whether it be to go write the will or go write the trust or something like that, or just have the conversation, or maybe it's you just need to go update it. Maybe you got married this year and just need to go update things. That's okay too. So thank you so much, Cassidy, for your time today. I truly, truly appreciate it. And to everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of The Next Generation. We will see you next week. And as always, all of Cassidy's links will be in the show notes and description, where you can go find her LinkedIn if you want to see her ruffle some feathers in the corporate industries, and or if you want to follow along on Instagram or anything like that, those will all be linked below. So thank you so much, and we'll see y'all next week. Bye-bye.